We've launched a new series titled The Four Horsemen of the American Apocalypse and Our Six Trials by Fire. In the first episode of the series, I explained who the four horsemen are that are threatening our nation. As we approach our 250th birthday, we must recognize that there are very real existential enemies seeking to take America down. Our nation stands virtually alone against totalitarianism. Those who seek to enslave mankind understand that they have to take America down first. Borrowing from the Bible, Jesus explained it this way in Mark 3:27. He said, "No man can enter a strong man's house and spoil his goods, except he will first bind the strong man, and then he will spoil the house." In this case, America is the threat to totalitarianism that must be bound up or taken out. And those who wish to see us fail include the red, the green, the blue, and the yellow. I use the analogy of horses similar to the four horsemen from the book of Revelation. In that case, the four horsemen portend the end of the world. In our example, it may just be the end of America. The red horse represents communism, especially communist China or the CCP. The green horse represents Sharia or an Islamic caliphate seeking to conquer the world. The blue horse represents global despotism under the banner of the United Nations, the World Health Organization, or the World Economic Forum. Finally, I previously used black to symbolize the fourth horse based on our own dark hearts full of apathy and greed. Now I want to change the color to yellow because I want to add all that, plus I want to add cowardice. So let's make the fourth yellow because traitors are cowards, selling out our future liberty for their personal gain. These are the Americans who've been embracing and enabling communism, Islamism, and globalism to seize power and to weaken America and to make profit. Make no mistake, each of these are formidable, but none could take America down, not by themselves, but working together and working with the traitors among us. They can weaken us and wear us down, and that is what is happening. We'll be covering the 6 trials by fire. They're underway even now, and they have been for some time. And these are of our own making, but the fires have been stoked by our enemies, and the consequences to liberty are threatening. The first of these is our own national debt. Alexander Fraser Tytler is an economist. He was writing in 1776, yes, the time of the founding of our country, and he lists how democracies go through bondage to faith, to courage, to liberty, to abundance, to selfishness, to complacency, to apathy, where we are now, to dependence, and then back into bondage. He said, democracies only last 250 years. Why is that, you ask? Greed. Democracies fail when citizens realize they can vote themselves largesse from the treasury. And Tytler adds, a democracy will finally collapse due to loose fiscal policy, which is always followed by a dictatorship. Now, the founders knew this. They didn't want a democracy. They wanted a constitutional republic so that people couldn't, the majority, vote themselves benefits from the minority. Sadly, most politicians today think we live in a democracy, and they are planning to give out plenty of goods, largesse, from the public treasury. As a result, our debt is up $6 trillion in 2 years. Look, I wrote the book Pirate Money. And in 2023, when I wrote it, our debt was $32.1 trillion. Look at it today. It's $38.1 trillion, up $6 trillion. The per taxpayer debt is up $78,000 per taxpayer in just 2 years. In fact, our debt increased $1 trillion in 71 days, and that was when the government was shut down. U.S. debt went to 37 to 38 trillion in 71 days. In fact, they added $383 billion even while the government was totally shut down. So how much is $1 trillion? It's roughly the total of all American consumer credit card debt. In fact, CNBC did a story last year that says credit card debt hits a record $1.14 trillion. We added $1 trillion to our federal debt in 71 days versus all of the lifetime of debt built up on credit cards by Americans. The federal government is failing us by spending too much money. What's the solution? You know what? We're paying $1 trillion every year just in interest now. And based on what we've seen over the past decade, if we stay on the trends we've been on, we will end up paying 100% of all taxes just to cover our interest payments. That means there'd be no money for employees, defense, Social Security. All income would go just to pay interest. Talk about a government shutdown. And guess what? If we project out for the next 16 years, we see that our tax revenues barely rise, but the net interest charges exceed them by a wide margin by the year 2050. Things get quickly out of hand from here. The Congressional Budget Office projected $100 trillion in new deficits over the next 30 years, and they did that 3 years ago. No. If you think the solution is taxing billionaires, that's not a solution. PolitiFact wrote, confiscating U.S. billionaires' wealth would run the U.S. government about 8 months. And then what we do? We'd tax the millionaires, and that would run out, and then we'd tax everybody else. This is something that our enemies understand. In fact, Igor Panarin, who worked with Vladimir Putin, wrote, and it was published in the Wall Street Journal in 2008, he basically said, mass immigration, economic decline, and moral degradation, and the collapse of the U.S. dollar would lead to the end of America. He called the U.S. foreign debt a pyramid scheme. And that was back when we had a very small debt relative to what we have now. This is overwhelming us. Our federal debt is approaching $40 trillion. Does anyone in Washington understand the significance of this? All right, we're gonna have to take a break. When we come back, we're gonna walk through the 7 critical truths you should know about our national debt. We'll be right back after this break. In uncertain times, finding stability in the economy can feel challenging. But what if you could navigate economic volatility while honoring your biblical values? At Timothy Plan, they believe this balance is possible. Timothy Plan filters its volatility-weighted ETFs and family of mutual funds through a biblical pro-life and pro-family lens, so you can see competitive returns and moral responsibility, helping you to weather the economic storms. With Timothy Plan, align your investments with your values while adapting to our ever-changing culture. Since 1994, Timothy Plan has been recognized leader in biblically responsible investing. Timothy Plan, your bridge between faith, finances, and the future. Visit timothyplan.com or call 1-800-TIM-PLAN or 1-800-846-7526. Investing includes risk, including possible loss of principal. Before investing, carefully consider a fund's investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses contained in the prospectus available at timothyplan.com.
Gold holds its value far better than the US dollar. Let's see what happens when I go in this sweet shop and pay with gold. Can I pay with gold?
I mean, you can wait, find out how much it costs.
Do you know what? Basically, do you know why I'm even using gold?
I do not.
It holds its value over time,
Yeah.
but it's a bit difficult to spend, isn't it? Do you take this?
Yes.
That's MasterCard. Yeah, but I'm actually going to pay with gold, believe it or not, using this. That's my MasterCard, and it's linked to my gold wallet. So let's just watch that. Authorizing. Yeah, add a tip.
Thank you.
So this is your store?
Yes, sir.
And how much gold did I pay?
0.2243 grams.
Yeah, success. Bought with gold, paid with glint.
Right before the break, I asked an important question. You know, our debt is approaching $40 trillion. It was 10 trillion when I started working in economic warfare, but that was just like 15 years ago. Does anyone understand the significance of this rapid debt increase? All right, Jared Bernstein, he was President Biden's chief economist, and he attempted to explain why this doesn't matter because of modern monetary theory. A modern monetary theory, or MMT, suggests that we can print all the money we need, and that will solve the debt problem. So he was asked a simple question in the Finding the Money documentary. He said, you know, if we can print money, why do we borrow money and so forth? Let's listen to his response to see if they get it in Washington. Let's roll this.
Like you said, they print the dollar. So why does the government even borrow?
Well, again, some of this stuff gets, some of the language and concepts are just confusing. I mean, the government definitely prints money, and it definitely lends that money, which is why the government definitely prints money, and then it lends that money by selling bonds. Is that what they do? They sell bonds. Yeah, they sell bonds, right? Because they sell bonds and people buy the bonds and lend them the money. Yeah. So a lot of times, at least to my ear with MMT, the language and the concepts can be kind of unnecessarily confusing, but there is no question that the government prints money and then it uses that money to yeah, I guess I can't really talk. I don't get it. I don't know what they're talking about. Like, because it's like the government clearly prints money. It does it all the time, and it clearly borrows. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this debt and deficit conversation. So I don't think there's anything confusing there.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything confused. You're totally confused. And you are the head of the Council on Economic Advisors for the President of the United States. The crazy thing is, modern monetary theory makes no sense whatsoever. It's built on the idea that you can print all the money you want and that will have no impact on the economy that's negative. Look, that's not going to work. Every nation that's tried it's gone bankrupt. There are 7 critical truths that you need to understand regarding debt before we can begin to address this problem. The first thing we need to know is they print the money and they borrow the money. Well, who owns the debt? The largest holders are Americans, whether in insurance policies, banks, pension funds, or mutual funds. Next would be foreign governments, then our own government and the Federal Reserve. So you can look at the chart. Intergovernmental holdings, $7.6 trillion. That's 20%. Foreign holders, $9.1 trillion. That's 23.9%. Federal Reserve owns $4.2 trillion. That's 11%. Mutual funds, $4.7 trillion. You know, what happens when somebody can't pay their debt? Well, the people they owe the money to, they get wiped out, right? You don't want to loan money to a deadbeat because the deadbeat can't pay you back and you'll just lose all your money. We're talking about foreign holders, Federal Reserve, mutual funds, banks, state and local governments, pension funds, and others that are at risk if our federal government defaults. That's why it's so important to understand who owns the debt, because these will be the people hurt. Guess what? You are the people. You've got it either in your pension fund or your mutual fund or through the Federal Reserve or intergovernmental holdings. What does that mean? That means Social Security Trust Fund. You want to get your Social Security paid? Then the U.S. government better be able to pay the debts. Everyone who holds debt will be hurt if the government defaults. And not being able to pay the interest, which we talked about in the first segment, would be a default for sure. And that's where we're headed over the next 16 years. Silicon Valley Bank, it failed, in part because they held a lot of treasury bonds and the interest rates rose. That means the bonds became worth a little bit less. What would have happened in a pure default and the treasury bonds defaulted entirely? The truth is that a failure to pay our debt would be catastrophic. That's the first truth. The second critical truth is that traditional spending cuts alone cannot solve this debt problem. That's why this is such a difficult challenge to address. Congress only controls a very small portion of the budget. Most of our spending is mandatory. Out of our $7 trillion in annual federal spending, more than $5 trillion is spending that is not appropriated annually by the Congress. This includes already promised payments and interest. When you look at it, mandatory spending is almost 2/3 discretionary spending and then interest. When you add mandatory and net interest together, you're getting 2/3 of our budget. What this shows is that just about 1/4 of spending is determined by the people you elect to Congress. That's why it's so hard to cut spending. You can't reduce Social Security without proper moral outrage, after all. People paid in for years with the promise they'd receive benefits. Sadly, there's no trust fund. It's really just a bunch of IOUs to our own debt. So when you look at all of the spending, you see Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid are almost 3/4 of mandatory spending. At present, we can cut discretionary spending. But did you know half of that is our Defense Department? Can we really cut that? What's left is still substantial, but includes things like the FDA, air traffic controllers, federal workers, and so forth. We saw the impact of closed government and the dislocations that were created. If we shut everything down permanently, including defense, we would still run a deficit. That's a sad reality. Of course, if we get to the point where mandatory spending and interest exceed our tax revenue, we'll have to either default or print money. In our current structure, that would be done by the Federal Reserve, creating money out of thin air and buying treasury bonds. This is called monetizing the debt. Do they understand this? Well, sadly, the Federal Reserve seems ready to print away. Take a listen to comments made on 60 Minutes.
Simply flooded the system with money.
Yes, we did.
So to lend to a bank, we simply use the computer to mark up the size of the account that they have with the Fed. So it's much more akin, although not exactly the same, but it's much more akin to printing money than it is to borrowing.
You've been printing money.
Well, effectively.
Where does it come from? Do you just print it?
We print it digitally. So we as a central bank, we have the ability to create money digital.
Flooding the system with money.
Yes, exactly.
And there's no end to your ability to do that.
There is no end to our ability to do that.
Basically, the Federal Reserve has said that they're prepared to flood the system with money. That's how they're going to solve the debt problem. That's no solution at all. The third critical truth is that large contingencies of voters benefit from our excess spending, and those same groups continue to push for more. Whenever you hear, we're the wealthiest country in the history of the world, we can surely afford to pay for this. You know the fix is in. Someone with a vested interest is demanding more spending. Remember, this is how democracies fail. Tytler said it. Democracies fail when citizens realize they can vote themselves largesse from the Treasury. We just saw that in New York, right? Where they elected Mom Donnie so they could get rent control and free groceries and free childcare and so forth. The downside of capitalism is that resourceful people stand ready to supply whatever's being asked for. That's true for tanks and planes to defend our country. It's also true for climate studies that show we'll all die in 5 years unless we switch from coal to solar, things like that. So we get lots of solar energy, even if it makes no sense. The Chinese figured this out. They hire lobbyists to promote an agenda of which they may amazingly profit. American companies are equally guilty. Because the government is the largest buyer of goods and services on planet Earth, everyone wants a piece of that consumer. That's why it's exceedingly difficult to reduce even a small amount of spending. Groups like Planned Parenthood and teachers' unions, they protect their turf and they have large voting contingents, but so do farmers and makers of electric cars like Elon Musk. So this is a bipartisan issue. Until we recognize there's no pile of money to disperse, only borrowing, we will keep falling for the bleeding heart appeals. We're gonna have to take another break. When we come back, we will continue with these critical truths about this horrible debt bomb. We'll be right back. We're talking about the debt bomb, and we've got to understand that every time we spend another dime, we're borrowing from the future. We're literally piling debt on our children and our grandchildren, making their burden even harder. No wonder so many people are turning away from liberty and free markets. They see no future. That's what happened in New York. All right, the fourth critical truth is that even though the almost $40 trillion we show with federal debt is actually understated based on generally accepted accounting principles, aka GAAP, G-A-A-P. Normally, companies have to show not only the debt that is payable today, but also the commitments and promises they've made. For example, GAAP requires that you, if you own a business, account for retirement benefits in the future and how you're saving for them. But in the case of the federal government, there's no savings. We can project with reasonable accuracy how much we will be paying in Social Security or public pensions. But we don't account for that on our government balance sheet. If this were a private corporation, the management and officers would go to jail for fraud. The Congressional Budget Office has already estimated that we have $100 trillion in additional liabilities that must be paid over the next 30 years. That's why they said $100 trillion in projected deficits. And earlier this year, the Tax Project took U.S. Treasury data and showed just how big these unfunded liabilities are compared to the economy. Others, such as an economist Lawrence Kotlikoff of Boston University, once estimated our unfunded liabilities and a fiscal gap of as much as $200 trillion. The bottom line is that as bad as our $40 trillion debt has been portrayed, it's actually understated, not overstated. So you can look at the unfunded liabilities, Social Security, Medicare, and federal employees and vets. They far exceed our economy size. The fifth critical truth is that while we have assets, they aren't liquid and they cannot be used to pay down the debt. Some have said, recently I was in a debate and someone said, don't worry about the debt because federal assets, including land, are worth up to $500 trillion. While we do have assets in the ground, there is no way we could sell all of them. Who would buy the Grand Canyon, for example? What would you get paid for it? Put naming rights on it or something? And even if the actual value of oil in the ground, plus our rare earth minerals, is worth trillions, and it is, it's in the ground, that's at market price. Adding new supply would depress the price, plus there's offsetting costs of extraction. When those factors are accounted for, these resources are a lot less than most people estimate. In fact, if we brought them all out now, it wouldn't pay off the debt. Finally, some of the pricing seems exaggerated. For example, 10 years ago, the Bureau of Land Management looked at 464 million acres of federal land, and they valued it at $4,100 an acre for a total of $1.8 trillion. In order to pay off the debt today, not counting future liabilities, we need to get more than $80,000 an acre. And we excluded national parks and wildlife refuge from the analysis because nobody's going to give those up. You know, the average price per acre across the U.S. remains under $10,000 an acre. In large plots that can't be developed, prices can be under $500 an acre. In fact, one recent sale was as little as $230 an acre because there's a lot of tundra, desert, and mountain. Guess what? That's in the American national lands also. Selling assets is not a reasonable solution. At best, if we sold everything, we might get 10% of our current debt paid. The sixth critical truth is that while there's a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse, getting rid of it is a lot harder than it looks. And at this point, it wouldn't dramatically change the debt trajectory. One government estimate suggests that over the past 2 decades, we've spent nearly $3 trillion fraudulently. That's a big number, but it's only a fraction of our total debt. DOGE was created to root out and eliminate this fraud. Over the past year, DOGE has saved us maybe a little over $200 billion, according to USDebtClock.org. The target was to be $700 billion by this point. So $200 billion is great. I'm glad we're saving it. And more should be done. But this alone will not prevent the debt bomb from exploding. And this leads us to our seventh and final truth. Managed inflation combined with additional real growth and productivity is the only reasonable path out. Inflation is inevitable from all the dollar printing, and we're going to have to find new and better ways to help Americans through it. That's why we've been pushing state-based gold and silver as money under Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution. The plan's outlined in my recent book, Pirate Money. You can order a copy at piratemoneybook.com. And while inflation hurts consumers, it does help borrowers, and it will help us get out of the debt mess. But that alone is insufficient. We also have to get government out of the way by reducing regulation. Research suggests that our economy loses $7 to $8 trillion per year from excess regulations, and that is based on data from almost a decade ago. So it's even worse now. If we had that growth every year and the government took 1/3 in taxes, we'd be running a surplus today rather than a deficit. Of course, there must be belt tightening as well. We've spent as much as $30 trillion over the last 60 years in the war on poverty, according to the Cato Institute. That alone is 3/4 of our total debt, and poverty rates have been staying stagnant. What if we could adjust that slightly by getting more at the root causes of poverty than treating the symptoms? The bottom line is we can address the debt problem, but it will take political will to do so. There will be short-term pain regardless. That's true for you personally if you're overspending and if you've maxed out your credit cards. Of course, it will be true for us as a society as well. But the good news, there are answers. And if you have a way to protect yourself from the inevitable inflation, you can ride safely through the storm. That's why we're racing with pirate money, aka transactional gold and silver. Think of it as a financial arc to help protect you in the coming trial. Of course, this is just the first of 6 trials by fire. In the next episode of this series, we're going to address the reality that other nations want to use our debt to destroy the American dollar. So stay tuned for the next few weeks. We've only skimmed both the surface of this trial and the solution. And remember, it's a great time to be alive. It's a great time to be optimistic. We do have solutions if we will get the political will. What they did in New York was the exact opposite. They said, things aren't going my way, so I want the socialist in power. That is guaranteed more debt and more failure. And Mamdani said it. He said, there's no problem too big for government to tackle. Neither is there any problem too small for government to care about. What he's literally said is that the solution to your problem and the debt problem is for government to be in every aspect of life. Do you think that's going to fix it? Of course not. That's why people are leaving New York, they're leaving California, and they're going to Florida and Texas, where there are free market solutions at play. Again, this is a great time to be alive. It's a great time to be optimistic. But we have to tackle these very real problems. We're going to summarize all of this in our free economic battle plan. You can get a copy at economicwarroom.com. Remember, what we see as a marketplace, our enemies view it as a battle space. This is true with debt and everything else. It's Kevin Freeman from the Economic War Room.